Hi, Steve. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the House Culture podcast today. You've been electrifying dance floors across the world since the early 90s with your signature sound that seamlessly integrates influences from across the entire spectrum of electronic music. A man that has been described by resident advisor as the gentleman of techno and head honcho behind the hugely influential label Poker Flat Recordings, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Before we dig into any of those bits that I mentioned, can you tell us whereabouts in the world you grew up and how did you first discover music there that you loved?
I grew up in Bremen. It's a town, but it's rather small compared to Berlin, or it's like I think 700,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty early got into electronic music. At first, all the breakdance stuff with the wild style movie and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first music I felt as different from the normal stuff that's being played on the radio.
Mm.
And then in the late 80s, I had a friend introducing me to house music, taking me to a
Mm-hmm.
club in Hamburg, where I
Mm-hmm.
first listened to a DJ, playing music all night, non-stop, no intros, just what we do today. So
Yeah.
mixing track by track into each other, fading. It was great. I got infected with the house virus immediately and started buying records and started making my own tapes.
Yeah, I mean, and like traveling from Bremen to Hamburg to go to this club, a real kind of expedition in terms of getting in a car or on a train with some friends to visit somewhere to particularly just to go and experience that type of environment. And what was the kind of vibe in that club at that time, and what music were you hearing, like in terms of house music?
Um, It was, first of all, the journey for us, it was quite normal once we got a driving license, and we had a car available, that we would go to other places because, again, it's a smaller city. So we would see everything that's going on. Sometimes we would go to clubs more in the countryside to experience something. And Hamburg, of course, because it's like 100 plus kilometers, so it's
Hmm.
like an hour drive. And the club is called the Front Club.
Hmm.
Boris Glugosch was one of the DJs who was playing there at the time,
Hmm.
and with Klaus Stockhausen. And it was a gay club.
Hmm.
The vibe was just also something that I didn't know from normal discotheques at the time. It was just very positive, hysteric at the same time, and very very friendly vibes on the dance floor, and very still till today. I'd say the layout of the club was the perfect. The sound, maybe compared to what sound is today, it was not like up to standard, but
Hmm.
from the sound system.
Hmm.
But the club layout, because you had the dance floor, the DJ was playing behind the dark glasses, so you couldn't see them,
Hmm.
um, which I think is rather helpful. I played at the club years later, and we started doing our parties there. And I have to say, from a DJ point of view, it's not so ideal because you kind of feel disconnected from the crowd.
Hmm.
But for the crowd, it's like, because you're not focusing on the DJ, you just see this, like, maybe like a shade of the DJ, so you didn't know what they were doing. And
Hmm.
so you could really concentrate on just the music. Also, there was no bar in the dance floor room, so
Hmm.
if you would turn off the light, it was completely pitch black. And so they've been able to create very hysteric moments by very simple lights.
Hmm.
uh, a lot of clubs these days, they forget it. Back in the days, I think a lot of good clubs, they always had like a light guy, or like a light girl, whatever, but like a person who really know what they were doing with the system. and who would really, add to the DJ set, to the music, to create like moments and build-ups and every stuff like that.
Mhm.
It's something that has been lost over the years by many of the clubs, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and in terms of that inspiring you, you were saying about how you then launched you on your career in terms of buying records and getting music. Where were you picking that up? And there's no kind of Shazam or anything like that back in those days. How did you know what you liked, and how are you getting hold of that?
Um, yeah, I've been buying records before, like all sorts of stuff. So I've been to record stores, and
Mm.
actually, when my friend told me that she wanted to take me to this club in Hamburg called the Front, and they play this music called house music, I was very curious, and I didn't know what to expect, and I couldn't Google because there was no internet. So I went to the record shop and I asked if they have some house records, and
Hmm.
I bought two compilations. One was the House Sound of Chicago, Volume
Hmm.
One, and
Yeah.
then another house compilation. I the other day I tried to find it, and I couldn't find it. But it had some of the very early classics on there, like Seven Ways to Jack was one of them that I remember. I
Yeah.
think You Used to Hold Me might have been on the other one. I'm not quite sure. And Liz Torres can't get enough.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
This kind of tracks. So more like of the one compilation, more of the really Chicago underground, and the other one a bit more in the, I don't want to say commercial, but more on the vocal tip.
Hmm.
And I kind of really like the simplicity of the music, and so after being to the club, falling in love with the sound, I've been going back to the record shop, and also started driving to Hamburg more, because there was a record shop already, who was importing all these records from the US,
Hmm.
where the DJs from the club did get the records. It was called Container Records at the time. Very popular record store, later based on the Reeperbahn, but before, like outside, in the north of Hamburg, I think.
Hmm.
And yeah, so and also compared to nowadays, there were only a few records being released every week, so it was very easy to pick the right ones, and you probably would have heard half of them in the club already,
Yeah.
because yeah, especially the bigger ones, as it was for many years, they were always, in on display in the record shops. So the ones you
Hmm.
heard in the clubs, they probably have been there, and then some new ones. But yeah, it was easy to get into and buy
Hmm.
more music, and bought a second turntable and a mixer, and it didn't have a pitch. Actually, one of my first turntable didn't have a pitch. The second did, so
Yeah.
I had to adjust with my fingers,
Uh-huh.
which actually really helped to understand
Yeah.
the grooves.
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful to do that, and I even tried with tapes before I could afford the second turntable, to match them, which is even harder. But you can also still adjust if you open the cover from the tape decks, you could still adjust with your fingers. Like at least make them slower. Faster, it's a bit difficult,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it does work. Like you kind of come up with these creative things when you don't have what you have nowadays in technology wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And like those limitations, like pushes people in different creative directions. I mean, once you've gotten hold of some decks and you've got a good record collection and you're funneling yourself down this sound, what was next for you? Did you start to get gigs, or were you just thinking like, I'm just doing this as a hobby?
To be honest, I was enjoying myself on the dance floor so much. I never really wanted to become a DJ. I was just doing it because I loved doing it, and I didn't bother playing in clubs. I made tapes for my friends, and they were like pushing me to play in clubs. But it took, I think, more than 3 years, or around 3 years, for me to finally decide to play. I was in Ibiza in 91.
Hmm.
1990, I was the first time for a week, and I fell in love with the vibe of the island, and went back in 91, with the guy I used to bartend with, a good friend of mine at the time. And so we decided to stay whole summer. And
Mhm.
actually, we both were hoping to get jobs as flyer people, or I was dreaming of a job as a dancer,
Mhm.
but I don't think my physiques were good enough to present myself on stage. And so, but yeah, that summer I stayed all summer, and partied my ass off. Spent all the money that I've made from working two jobs over the year, and had to go back home at one point. I was driving down with my Beetle Volkswagen. That's actually how the Steve Buck came across.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so that summer, me and my best friend, we decided that we should bring some of these vibes from the island to our hometown, because Bremen, as I mentioned before, was a rather boring kind of city.
Mhm.
So we asked the owner of the club that we used to bartend at if we can do a party, like a monthly thing. And
Mhm.
he was giving us a Friday. And so yeah, we kind of took a lot of the inspirations from the island, how to promote the parties. We went with something that never happened in Bremen before. We dressed up we always had theme parties at the time, which is
Mhm.
from nowadays perspective, I think is quite stupid, but it was fun at the time. And maybe that's why I don't like costume parties anymore. But anyways, so we did this, and we dressed up in the theme of the parties, and went around cafes and bars in the evening, and
Mhm.
started giving out flyers and some free tickets. Something we learned from the Ibiza
Mhm.
days, and that made the party very successful. And the city. I don't want to say dance, but the City Info magazine was easily finding out about this, and they asked us to do an interview, so we got quite popular very fast.
Mhm.
um, we asked one of the DJs that was working at the club, who we really liked, but we couldn't afford a second one. So the idea was that I was playing alongside.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I finally had to start DJing, even though I didn't really want it to. But the parties were so successful that after, I think, four or five, we were also doing a Sunday evening with more like smoother house stuff, like, very like New York house based, where I was also playing, but that I really enjoyed because it was more of a bar feeling, like hanging out,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not like crazy dance floor, people coming out to have some drinks. But yeah, after four of these parties, people started to the owner asked me and the other DJ if we wanted to take over the Saturday night as regulars. He
Mhm.
already was working on this Saturday with another guy, and but they were playing like all mixed kind of, like acid jazz, some breakdown stuff, some funk,
Mm.
some black music, some house music, like, so all kind of mixed. And so this was the first proper, I don't want to say techno, but more, like electronic music based night in that club. There was another, but I think it was also not like, it was more like a monthly thing that Jan Helmerding uh, was doing,
Mhm.
who was also quite popular in the house scene later on.
Mhm.
And yeah, and so Jens Malstedt and me, that was the other DJ, got into the Saturday, and started working weekly on a weekly base in the club. And then I made some friends in Ibiza from Munich that also were starting doing parties in Munich at the time.
Mhm.
One of those was Acid Maria.
Mhm.
She kind of stopped DJing many years ago, but she was quite popular at the time, and their parties were great as well. And so we invited each other to each other's cities, to each
Mhm.
other's parties. So I
Yeah.
started playing in Munich quite early. Then I had friends in Hamburg, who I knew from going out in Hamburg a lot, who were running a night. Henry Stamer-Johann and Tobias Lampe, my nowadays label partner.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing like weekly nights at the Unit Club back in the days, and we invited Henry over. Henry was the first person to be in the studio with. I finally decided I wanted to know about how this music is produced. Now I know that how it's mixed, how it's working in the club. I
Yeah.
was I was uh, I was really interested in how it's produced, and so Henry invited me to his studio, and he had a lot of outboard gear. Of course, these days you couldn't really just work on the laptop because
No.
there was not enough capacity for that. And then I soon decided that I needed my own equipment. Started working
Mm-hmm.
with some other guys from Oldenburg, the guys from UMate, Oliver Huntemann, Gerrit Freris, and Pek Jomberg,
Mm-hmm.
who had some big tracks at the time. And Jens was working with Gerrit at the studio, and I did one release with Gerrit and a few other stuff not so well known with Oliver Huntemann, and then. I bought my own equipment. Had to take a credit from the bank. My mom saved this. You have to get some insurance that if you're not able to pay it back,
Yeah. Yeah.
so someone has to get into it, jump in for it. My mom did it, and and then I brought at the time I moved to Hamburg. I started working at the Superstition office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I did the bookings in the office, and so I brought the first tracks that I created to the office on a tape deck,
Mm.
on a tape cassette. And my label partner nowadays, he he was let's listen to this, like blah blah blah. I was like, okay, and and then he was like, can I take this over the weekend? I was like, yeah, please, go ahead. And then he came back on Monday and he was like, hey, I want to release these. Like, this is my first tracks. You seriously,
Wow.
I didn't really know how to, yeah. And so like they were released, and then
Yeah.
it all kind of started getting better and better, and then we decided to start the first label
Mm.
together. I didn't really feel well in the surrounding of the other artists, also stopped doing the booking agency, um, because I wanted to focus more on creating music.
I mean, there must have been a moment during that where, especially when you're getting things released and you think, actually, I might have a real talent for this. It's getting, people are telling me that it's good, and I'm getting a lot of response for it. Was that the moment where you thought, actually, I could maybe make a career out of this? This could be a pathway as I get older.
Yeah, to be honest, the when I was in Bremen, there was a change of club owners at one point, before I moved to Hamburg, and
Mm.
the new owner said he wanted to offer more money on the gig because we barely got enough money to buy the records. So it was really as a hobby. I was working a normal job still during the week, and so that was my first thinking. Okay, I can work even less during the week and put more time into music production and DJing.
Hmm.
But that never happened. The club closed down after a few nights because we all kind of left. He kind of made some weird promises. The club has been closed down for 1 month, and they wanted to do changes, and they only painted it from blue to green. And there was a new club in town where a lot of people started going out for 4 weeks, and then they kind of never really came back to the other one. And
Yeah.
also, we didn't really want to work with this person anymore. So the whole crew, DJs, bar stuff, everyone just left, and so he was left with no stuff, and no
Yeah.
one wanted to work there, and so the club was done. So then I moved to Hamburg. That was one of the main reasons. And then I thought I might not be able to make a living out of it. I also always saw it more as something that is just for a time, and then I would do
Mm.
something else afterwards,
Yeah.
because there was no real examples of people making a living of just making music.
Mm.
Apart from in the pop culture, what. from the DJs, I didn't really know people who were just making records and playing music in clubs and who were making a living. So we didn't have anyone to look up to or any idea of that this could even become a business. Of course, the hopes were there that you could live from making music at one day,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we didn't know that it's ever going to work. So when it finally started to happen, even though in the beginning it was very tough when I stopped doing the working at the booking agency. Um, I was living in a very small room in a shared flat where I had everything: my studio, my record collection, my bed, just everything. Um, and sometimes I wasn't even able to pay the rent, and
Mm.
I was living off pasta with butter sometimes because I couldn't even afford tomato sauce. So it was kind of a rough time somehow,
Yeah.
but at the same time, yeah, I knew that this was something I wanted to do, and I started to believing in myself, as you said before. When
Hmm.
people think, and then you may at these days you were making some money from music productions.
Hmm.
It started to pick up. Selling 1,000 records at the time would pay you around 500 to 1,000 euro depending on the deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, making more and more records and also getting more and more gigs, and also gigs were paying a bit better. So it finally slowly by step, um, I was starting to make a living out of it, and
Mm.
then I moved to Berlin at one point, and that was even easier to make a living because everything was so cheap at the time in Berlin.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I'm still here.
Well, and here you are. And I mean, you mentioned that first label that you kind of started working with. That was that Raw Elements you're talking about there in terms of that
Exactly,
one. I
exactly.
mean, yeah, that was the kind of mid 90s era. Tell us a little bit about before we get on to because that obviously leads into Poker Flat. What was the story behind getting Raw Elements set up, and what kind of sound did that label have?
I mean, first of all, I just didn't feel at home anymore on Superstition Records because of all the
Mm,
other music being released being very different, and also, yeah, I wanted to be surrounded by like-minded people, not only when it comes to music, but a lot of other things. And and so I I said to Tobias, look, I don't feel comfortable releasing with the label anymore. I'm really thankful for all the help and blah 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 blah, but I think I'm gonna send out my music to other labels, which at that time I never had a exclusive contract or something, but
hmm.
still at that time a lot of people would be just releasing with one label instead of nowadays everyone is sending it to every other label, and they're trying to get releases on as many labels as possible to get heard
Hmm.
out there. So it was kind of a big thing for me, but he was the one suggesting to start a label, and to see where we can take it. And I kind of really liked the idea, and I was like, okay, let's do it. And then we started signing some people I knew from Hamburg that were having like a similar vision. Vincenzo, for example, um, that was someone that I think was one of the first ones to have on the label. I'm not so quite sure. It's so many years ago. Sören Schnakenberg, who was I was doing the parties with at the Front Club for a while. Also,
Hmm.
Asa Maria, I was working on some tracks with her. So the sound, I think, was more raw and Chicago based, and very rough. I didn't really have many effect units at the time.
Hmm.
So it was, yeah, it was actually made with what I had. And also the others didn't really have like big studios or something. So it was kind of a really raw sound, sometimes sounding better than other times. And our distribution didn't really take us serious after a long time, and I wasn't really happy with the way it was going, because they were selling us as kind of a experimental label, which I didn't think we were. We
Yeah.
were quite minimal and maybe, quite forward thinking at the time,
Hmm.
but definitely not what I would see experimental. But yeah, so it was a great time, and but with the distribution, I was like suggesting that we would work with another distribution. Container Records were doing the distribution at the time,
Hmm.
and but my label partner wasn't really keen on doing that, because he was worried that if we would change with Raw Elements, that they would also not handle Superstition anymore, which I think they probably wouldn't have bothered, because, as I was saying, they didn't really feel the label anyways.
Hmm.
So the stubborn me decided to start a new label called
Uh-huh.
Dessous Records,
Hmm.
by myself, and just to show him that with another distribution we could do better. And yeah, we started Dessous Records, which was more of a deep house kind of vibe, disco loopy kind of stuff, but really deep.
Hmm.
Vincenzo was one of the first ones to move over with me, and I think I after 3 or 4 releases, we started with Container. The numbers were so much better than the numbers we had on Raw Elements with the other distribution.
Hmm.
Then we had another sit down, and we decided to close Raw Elements and start something new, and that was Poker Flat at the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, started with Container distribution,
Hmm.
which unfortunately they had a problem with the people with the stuff. Also, there was kind of a back and forward between them, and they had different ideas of how to run the company,
Hmm.
and so they the stuff actually left and founded a new distribution, which we went with. But so for our first release wasn't available for at least 3 months. We weren't able to buy it, which I think kind of created a hype. It was Loverboy and
Yeah.
the other 2 tracks on the EP.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was kind of strange, because it started very well, and then suddenly the record wasn't available.
Hmm.
Something that, if I think is this would happen nowadays, after 3 months, it's just done. That's it.
Yeah.
Like, there's so
Yeah.
much new music, no one's gonna wait for it. But back
Hmm.
in the days, whenever we finally came back with the release, we kept on selling it. But it was a real slow seller. It was not like, we had later on, we had some records that we would sell over just a few months. This was selling over years. It was just constantly
Wow.
selling, but not like in huge numbers, just constant, in small numbers, constantly, more and more. And I was like, what the fuck is happening here? And it's funny, because I knew the track was something
Mm.
special, and the Kai Freger, who was running the distribution, he wasn't so sure about. He was really, at the time, it was a lot of, naked music, I think, was already there, and I can't think of the Natural Rhythm, I think, was one of the other labels. So there were so many labels that was very, like, kind of classic, kind of housey stuff that were really doing well at the time, and
Yeah.
so were Dessous recordings. And then when I came up with this track, and he was like, yeah, I don't know, I don't feel it that much. But then there was a party in Hamburg, I remember. We all have been there. My label partner, some of my friends, Henry was there as well. I think some of the other guys from the city that you later on were starting clubs, and also our distribution, Kai was there, and some other, Mark Schneider, who was working at Word and Sound at the day, at Container already back in the days. He was also
Mhm.
there, if I remember correctly, and so I had a dub plate of the record, and I played it, and and the whole club no one knew the club, no one knew the track, but the whole club went completely nuts, and everyone was like, okay, now I think we're onto something, it was great to see that kind of thing, and then yeah, it finally proved us right that we've been selling heaps of this track.
Yeah, I mean that first track on Poker Flat, you mentioned obviously Loverboy. In terms of Poker Flat as a label, just in general, it's obviously celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. It's 2024. I mean, it's a real cornerstone of the scene. This label, it's been releasing solid underground house, techno for a quarter of a century now. If you look at that first released Loverboy to kind of like the evolution of sound to where you are now, how would you say that sound of the label has evolved from then to now?
Well, first of all, I think in general, production standard really improved over the years. So it's way easier to get a very good sound compared to what it was back then. I remember that most of my friends were using um, Mackie mixers because they were affordable and good quality, but yet the EQ was compared to what you have now in any DAW. It's very wide banded.
Hmm.
So also you didn't have any visual information about what you were doing, which frequencies were there and which weren't. It was everything had to be done by your ears,
Yeah.
and so that kind of, I think, was what made the sound of many of the records also before, from the early Detroit stuff, the early house records that haven't been produced in big studios, where like people who've been mixing funk or disco records for many years before, who really knew what they were doing. So it was
Mm.
all like people just learning things by doing it, and
Hmm.
so getting better at stuff. So I think this has definitely improved. Apart from that, I think I kind of feel it's it's kind of the same, at least to me. It's kind of the same vibe. It's the way. I mean, I'm the A&R. I'm choosing music that I personally really like, and of course, uh, is style is changing, and you're influenced by what's happening. But it was never my idea or in my intention to follow any trends or to do what's hip at the moment, or as a producer, nor as a DJ, nor as a label A&R. Um, for me, it was always important to stay true to myself and to what I feel it's right. And I don't want to play the game. I didn't get into music to play the game of someone else.
Hmm.
I want to do stuff that I want to do and stuff that I like. And so I think, again, for me, the music is kind of has still the same kind of vibe to it. It's just produced much better, and maybe also musically a bit richer than it was back then, because we also learned a bit more about like music creation in general.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, also what has changed a lot. Back in the days, we were kind of a crew. A lot of my friends been releasing on the label. Martin Lansky, the Martini Brothers, Hakan Lidbo was one of the first guys that I didn't really know before he started releasing on the label, and then later on John Tejada, and but it was always it was for a long time. It was people around me that I met on the way,
Hmm.
that we released on the label. So it was kind of a friendship thing for many years, and then I think with getting more and more known, we got more and more demos from other people and from
Yeah.
other artists, and sometimes I was meeting people. I remember Trent Muller, for example. I met him at a show in Denmark, and he had an EP on Naked Music, the Champagne EP, and I really loved
Yeah.
that track. Um, and I actually wanted to get some music from 40 Sue from him because I was kind of looking for some new artists for the label. And he finally sent some tracks. He was like, "Look, these are the tracks, but I don't think they're really suitable for the label. I still wanted to send them, check them out, and yeah, then we decided to release them in Poker Flat, and they were very well received, and we had a few other EPs, and he got very popular in a very short time.
Yeah.
And then he even came up with the album, where at first we didn't really know what to do with it because it was very more into a listening kind of electronic music direction, something that we haven't had done before.
Yeah.
So we didn't really know what to expect. And but again, the album was kind of doing what the first EP was doing. It was kind of selling over weeks and months. We just kept on repressing, but in numbers actually that were scary for us.
Really.
We never had pressed that many numbers, and for people who know the business at the time, when you would put out 10,000 CDs, there was a big chance that if the stores wouldn't sell it, that's how the deals were, that they would give it back to you, and you would
Yeah.
sit on them and had already paid for them, and you wouldn't get the money back.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a bit scary for us, but it all worked out quite well.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then after that, I think we went to the most difficult period because also the music was changing a lot out there. A lot of people, I feel that a lot of people try to copy what we were doing. Um, at the time, the sound was really something that we had been doing for a long time. So it was kind of strange. It happened to some other labels afterwards. The progressive house stuff coming out of Mannheim, for example, they had the same thing. The sound got popular so fast, and a lot of labels been imitating, and a lot of producers been creating sound that was very similar. And it was kind of a sellout of a sound, and the originators kind of got lost in the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's at one point it's great to see that people finally pick up on your sound. On the other hand, it's just terrible because they're destroying the whole vibe that you created, and take it to the next more commercial level, and then finally burn this kind of sound completely. And then it's either you have to change or you have to step back a bit and just sit it out and wait for the sound to kind of come back, or like have enough people being interested in it again. So yeah, I kind of started to sign some music that was kind of away from the main focus, and so more going back to like some deeper stuff that maybe is not very obvious functional wise. um, and then from there, I think the second spring started, at least for me musically. And that, I think, set the real foundation for where we're at these days, because
Yeah.
after that we had a lot of great artists sending us demos that I never had seen on the label before. I would have never thought of them being on the label, but they came to us instead of I had to ask for demos or something like that. So I think there's something that we're quite lucky with, because as any label, you have to rely on the demos that people send to
Yeah.
you. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
you can do whatever you want. You try to be the coolest label. If the people don't send you the right music to release, then that's not going to happen unless
No.
you're releasing only your own stuff.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, what are you looking for when someone sends in a demo? What are you looking for specifically? Is it just a groove, a vibe, certain technical wizardry? What makes your ears perk up when you're listening to a demo and think, I need to sign this?
Yeah, I think first of all, it needs to have a groove that catches me immediately, and there needs to be some hypnotic elements in any ways. That's something I like to play as a DJ also a lot. Something that takes you on a journey musically. It could also just happen with beats. There's been like some Hakan Litbo stuff from the early days, for example, that were basically just drums,
Mm.
most of it. But they had the same hypnotic vibe that I've been kind of looking for, and build-ups that have been not like typical snare roll, drum roll, whatever kind of things. Um, there has to be a certain deepness also. It's really hard to to explain. I love Moog sounds. That sometimes helps to have like a minor Moog bass line that
Uh-huh.
might get my attention. But um, yeah, I mean, it's as you can see nowadays, we kind of, sometimes it's more like deep house because we put Dessous asleep a few years ago, and decided to keep on just focusing on poker flat. And Yeah, so we try to stay a bit open to other sounds, but again, it's sometimes could be like still like techie housey,
Hmm.
um, but mostly it's kind of a vibey, deeper, evolving kind of tracks. I think that's what
Yeah.
I would describe them.
Cool. I mean, it's so hard to put into words sometimes. I mean, you've mentioned Trent Moller. I mean, alongside yourself, obviously on the label, release wise, you've released things from Joyce Muniz, Josh Butler, who we've spoken to on this podcast as well before, and all the way up to recently releases with legends of like progressive house like Quiver and Dave Seaman. Who have you been along that journey like very excited to work with, and who potentially haven't you had on the label that you'd love to secure?
Uh, um, well, I think I'm happy with have worked with everyone we had on the label because as again, as I was saying before, it's important that people send us these great tracks. Otherwise, we wouldn't be there. So I'm very grateful for every track that we released, and for every artist that participated in being a part of the label's profile
Mm.
with their productions. But when it comes to people I would see, or I would love to see on the label, even if it's just for a remix, for me, like we had Laurent Garnier doing the remix for us. I think he's one of those for me um, very outstanding talents, not only music production, also as a DJ.
Hmm.
I was doing some events in Berlin for a while before the pandemic hit, and he was one of my DJs on the long list. And I had him play at my parties, and he proved me right that he's still like I think one of the major influences in electronic music in Europe when it comes
Absolutely.
to many things.
Mm.
Um, Kai Craig, for me, is also one other artist that I always respected. There was a time in the late 90s, early 2000s where like almost every single track or remix he released, it was just people being, I remember people being waiting for a new Carl Craig track. And I played so many of his tracks, and so many hours of his music have been played in my sets. Unfortunately, he's not doing that many tracks these days.
Mm.
At least he's not releasing it. I think it's also maybe a lot of the artists that have been releasing great music back in the days, they kind of stopped producing music, maybe, or at least releasing. And
Hmm.
I don't know if that's because you're not really making any money out of it anymore, and they rather focus on other stuff, or self-promoting or whatever. But I think that these productions are kind of missing in nowadays release schedules out there in the world. So that would be great if we could ever have him on the label.
Mm.
There are definitely plenty of other artists that I can't think of right now, um, from old school to new school.
Yeah.
But yeah, these are the two that come to my mind immediately.
Awesome. And, looking at the label, what it's achieved over the past 25 years, I mean, apart from its obviously its longevity, which is insane, um, what are you most proud of, and what's the kind of biggest achievement you'd said you've achieved with the label?
Um, well, I think being still around and being still noticed as a cool label.
Mm.
Also, like looking at the charts, sometimes we still able to hit the top 10 on Beatport or on Traxsource every now and then. Um, which is very rare for a lot of the. I mean, basically there's not that many labels from the past that are still around. So I think that's, in general, I always look in. I don't look too far in the future. I don't look too far in the past. I'm living in the moment, and so I always try to see or vision what's happening now, instead of going 10 years back or 5 years ahead.
Yeah.
Um, I just happy that we're still here and still, like, playing a big part in shaping the electronic music world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the moment is the best place to live, I think. And I just want to touch on as well in terms of like the design of the label, the aesthetics and the branding, it's quite singular, it's kind of changed over time, but like there are big long periods where you could just see a label or some artwork and you immediately know it's on Poker Flat. How important is it for you to have that type of consistency across the label?
I think in general it's important to have. I'm a very visual person, and I'm also responsible for most of the artwork. Not that I'm creating it, but with our graphic guys,
Hmm.
I'm deciding on the layouts and stuff, and I think it's, in general, I think it's really important to have an ID in the artwork. And sometimes I wish you could continue certain things for much longer, but sometimes they stop because the creators of the art started working at a job and didn't really have enough time anymore to create any more labels for us.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, and then also I'm kind of getting bored of certain looks after some time, and I look for something different. And so yeah, it's an interesting part of the job. I mean, for me,
Mm.
it's like it's all kind of getting hand in hand, and it's all part of the concept of running a label, and yeah. And this is also, again, like, I'm a in general a very minimalistic person, or at least I try to be, not to overload myself or my house with stuff that I don't need.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, I didn't really champion the same thing in my studio, because because I bought way too many synthesizers over the years. And even though I moved to a much smaller place, I still kept like so many, and I managed to put them even in the small room by creating my own furniture with the guys from Session Desk,
Hmm.
who helped me, like, or at least they built them and they helped me, like, design them. But I really had a clear vision of how I wanted my studio to be. But yeah, this is something, also record collection. I just I've been buying too many records in my life.
Yeah, it's a familiar theme on this podcast. Believe me,
Yeah.
it's hilarious how people feel kind of the weight of the vinyl on their lives and equipment as well. I mean, we've spoken to Cynthia on this podcast as well. Obviously, another Berlin-based producer and DJ. And she took us through kind of some elements of her studio. You're obviously based in Berlin now in your studio. Um, you know, you kind of mentioned there a little bit that you've built it up over the years and not really maybe gotten rid of things that you should have done. How beholden are you to older things, leaning on and those older production techniques, or are you very much like, I want to learn new things and new ways of doing things? How does that work for you?
Yeah, well, I have to say that in my old studio, there was a point where I had to buy a new computer, and I finally been able, because the other one was quite old. I've been running hardware most of the time, so my DAW didn't really have to do anything apart from synchronizing the synthesizers and maybe recording them into the DAW, and that. But that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
I've been mixing my tracks with Hannes Bieger for many years in his studio because he had all the outboard gear necessary for mixing that I couldn't afford because I spent all my money into synthesizers, and and I was never really focusing on the mixing side in hardware. I have a few compressors and EQs, but not as many as as a professional mixing engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And also in 2012, I realized that many people at the time were using mixing engineers, and so I decided that I try it out myself because I wasn't always happy with my mixes at the time, and I realized that it really helped me also to let go of certain things. Um, I was working on tracks. And I had the mix down on the mixer, so I couldn't really start anything else. So I had to finish this one track, no
Yeah.
matter what, and it was really keeping me off working on new tracks. So once I started working with Hannes, I realized that if I just set everything to zero on the mixer and do the volume on the synthesizers before I record them,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes just adjusting the synthesizer volumes, then I could easily go back and forward and work on more tracks at the same time, and
Mm-hmm.
that really helped me to get more productive and also to get better quality tracks, I think. And So that's why I kept on working with Hannes for a very long time, even though I learned a lot about mixing over the years, and the gear have been the digital gear has been becoming much better, and it was also the DAWs were sounding much better than they used before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Then when I changed my computer, I finally were able to install all the new software. And as it is with all new tools, you start to play around with the new tools. And I ended up with the last album, uh, Never Ending Winding Roads,
Mm-hmm.
which was actually produced, I think, 100%, at least 90, 98, 90 something percent in the box.
Yeah.
And I also did take off the mixing for the first time after the whole working with other people for mixings. And I really enjoyed the whole process. Also, I realized that when I do the mixing myself again, I can go back to changing a kick drum, something you wouldn't do. You go to
Yeah.
the mixing engineer with your stems, and then you're there, and you barely change anything like from the sounds that you've chosen. But if you do everything yourself, then you realize, oh my God, I have to re-record the synthesizer. So you would do it,
Yeah.
or you just exchange the kick drum or something like that. So it became a part of also sometimes creating certain types of tracks. It kind of it's necessary to work with effects while creating it.
Hmm.
to create something different from what you usually do. That also really helped, and I really enjoyed working in the box on that album. And
Hmm.
so I wasn't really, the album with Langenberg, for example, that we did before. There we used like pretty much hardware on every synthesizer that's recorded on the album. But it's also because we were working, the two of us, and we kind of, a lot of times we would jam. Like he was standing at one keyboard, I was standing at the Moog, like playing a bass line or something like that. It was a really fun process. But for me, working myself, I have to say, I don't bother working outside the box or inside the box. I just do whatever I feel comfortable with at the moment.
Yeah.
And I realized that also, even though I have all the gear, I don't feel the weight on my shoulders that I have to use it.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it just sits there, but then it could be a great source of inspiration, as every other new piece of gear, as I was saying about before, with all the new software that I finally had available.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, sometimes going back to a synthesizer and getting results much easier than in the box. It's also really helpful. It's good to have a lot of synths. Still have enough, way more than enough. So a few less would definitely not hurt me, um, and I would still be able to go back and have some fun with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't have to rely on it. That's also good,
Yeah.
knowing that I could, just take my computer and a screen and some speakers and go anywhere in the world and work on music. That's really helpful, because for many years when I had my old studio, only the mixing desk. I accidentally got a 48 channel mixer. I only wanted a 40 channel mixer. But the Alan Heath offered me a special deal on a console, and I
Hmm.
didn't read the small note. Because I was requesting a 40 channel mixer, and I was asking if they could give me a good deal on it, and I got a good deal on a 48 channel mixer, which was actually cheaper than the original 40 channel mixer at the time, probably because I had the frames lying around, because a lot of people were also going to analog mixers at the time, and
Hmm.
it's a live mixing console, so I think it's definitely helpful for people to go digital mixing, to go back to what you've been doing on the console
Yeah.
with every other track, instead of having to EQ everything on the run,
Yeah.
on the go. Yeah. So yeah, I ended up when I remember I've been touring when the mixer arrived, and Martin Lansky, Klee, my good friend who I produced a lot of music with, and I don't know, some other guy, some of my friends, they were the ones who had to carry up the desk into the studio, and they were like, Steve, it looks so big. I don't know if they didn't open the box, of course. They
Mm.
were like, I don't know, it feels like it's much bigger than the 40 channel. And I'm like, well, maybe they just use a very big box. And so when I came back from the tour, I finally opened the box. I was like, 48 channel. Then I started reading through emails, and I was like, okay, yeah, they offered me 48 channel. So okay, I had these 8 extra channels for like the next whatever many years. I had them, so I wasn't able to move anywhere with my studio, because that's, even just carrying the mixing desk around would have been impossible.
Yeah.
So it really got me. It really got me imprisoned in my own environment,
Yeah.
and not being able to move to any other place.
Yeah, what an absolute beast that must have been. So yeah, like you say, that would have absolutely tied you to one location where you're only working from there. I mean, when you're producing material in the studio, how, and this is a question we always ask everyone usually, is that how do you kind of know when things are finished? Do you road test material and then are meticulous about getting back in the studio and changing things that might not have worked, extending something, changing the kick drum, or do you get it all right in the studio and then just know that it's going to work?
Well, I I pretend to know that it's gonna work. I fail rarely, I have to say.
Hmm.
But I'm very bad at road testing for one particular reason. I also not I'm not playing my own tracks that often,
Hmm.
unless they're already released for a few months, or sometimes I do play them when they come out or a few weeks before. But the reason is that when I'm playing, I'm really getting into the zone, and I don't want to do anything that gets me out of the zone. And when I start playing my own tracks, especially the not 100% finished ones,
Hmm.
where I still can change things, I start to analyze the track instead of staying in the zone and continuing what I'm doing. And it really takes a long time for me to go get back into the zone. So I barely road test tracks, which is not ideal for. I think sometimes arrangement. I could work on certain stuff that you could extend or like shorten. Um, but yeah, I rarely do it. I sometimes do it. I have to be really confident about the track, and the situation also has to be right to be to play the track. Also, I think it's again that I don't try to make music that works. I try to make music that comes out of me, and there's not always the right moment to play the track that you're working on right now.
Mm.
So it might be in a few weeks, and suddenly you're in a situation where it perfectly fits. Um, but yeah, my sets are generally very different from uh, from the vibe of the location, the sound of the what that comes out of the speaker, the crowd that is in the club, how they react to certain tracks. For me, it's kind of I always say it's kind of a getting into an unknown country, trying to figure out which language people speak, and then learn the language, and then start to communicate with each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
And this is how I built my set. So I don't think of I want to play this track or that track tonight. I completely go with the flow and let everything happen. And the best nights are when I don't even think of any other track that I'm gonna play. It's just every track is just coming like out of the blue. It's like oh this track, oh that track, oh yeah, play this, yeah, and then that, and then yeah. Sometimes they just come out of the blue, and it all like makes complete sense.
Yeah, and that must make it much more exciting as well. Behind the decks about that unpredictability. When you're playing a set in a club or a festival or wherever, how do you work in terms of getting to the venue beforehand to absorb kind of what's been going on before your set? Do you like to get there just to see which way the dance floor might be leaning, or do you just want to parachute in and just be Steve Bug?
I mean, yeah, it depends. If it's a club and the music is somewhere near what I'm playing, I would probably. I mean, I'm always coming a bit early. I try to be at least 45 minutes before the set to get into the vibe. I'm trying not to get too early because then alcohol might be an issue, because I kind of as you're standing around, people offer you drinks all the time, and I'm a very healthy person in general. I don't really drink that much. I've never done, but still I want to be clear in my head. So I want to have one or two shots before I start to play. If I'm drinking, I have certain months of the year where I'm not drinking.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I still want to be like 100% focused, and but I also want to catch the vibe of the DJ before, of the club itself, the sound system. I kind of want to embrace the whole feeling.
Hmm.
And the closer it is to what I'm doing, the more I'm gonna take over from that what's going on, and then like it's gonna go anywhere else anyways, but I would take over from where we were, and then go to something else, somewhere
Yeah.
else. But if it's a festival, a lot of times, or even in clubs, sometimes they put a DJ before you who plays like very different tracks. Especially nowadays, there's a lot of young DJs who play, from my point of view, rather commercial kissed tracks,
Hmm.
like some 80s classic with a house beat underneath or something like that. Music I would never play. I've been dancing to these tracks in probably not even dancing to these in discotheques, but I heard them on the radio billions of times, and I
Mm.
some of them I hated already back then. So I wonder why they picked like these bad tunes, like why I'm wondering, as an OG, I'm I'm wondering what happened, that we went from getting away from the commercial music into the dark pitch black clubs playing like real underground kind of music, where we get as far as away as possible from these commercial radio tracks, to like now it's cool to play these kind of messed up versions of these old commercial tracks. So for me, it's everyone's to his or to their own liking. I
Yeah.
don't, I don't blame anyone. It's fine. It's another generation also. But for me, it's just like I'm like, okay, I can't go anywhere after this. I have to start from scratch. I have to
Yeah.
let the last track finish, and then I might lose anyone on the dance floor, everyone on the dance floor, and then I have to rebuild the whole
Hmm.
situation.
Yeah.
Luckily, these kind of moments happen very rarely, but they happen, and. And then yeah, of course, I start from scratch. I start with an intro. I play some more like some groovy tracks, that I try to set again, uh, create the carpet of sound and groove
Hmm.
over whatever amount of tracks, and see when I have a solid situation on the dance floor, then I start, going into other directions. I think in general, I'm more of a DJ that I've never been like one that I can't play like for 45 minute set on a
Oh,
festival.
yeah.
I'm not good at starting with a big track and then playing banger after banger. I need my time to develop my set. I need my time to also settle
Hmm.
musically, and also, as I was saying, like trying to find the language with the
Hmm.
people. Um, so yeah, I definitely prefer to play in clubs and play at least 2 hours, and being able to build a bit of a journey, at least for the people. And luckily, most of the times I'm allowed to do so, and sometimes play longer also. I'm not the biggest fan of like 10 hour sets. Some DJs play like 10 hours or something like that. I think after a certain amount of time, you lose like so much energy yourself and tension.
Hmm.
It works in certain surroundings, but I'm also, I think, like probably 2 to 4 hours are like ideal. Five is already hard sometimes, really depending on the club and the situation.
Yeah.
At least for me. And then after, I think I don't know. I wouldn't really feel like I still have enough tracks or creativity to come up with something great, so I
Yeah.
rather leave it to the next DJ, instead of trying to play something that I maybe don't want to play just to
Hmm.
keep on playing or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And it is about that journey as a DJ. The most interesting DJs, certainly for me, are I like listening to ones that will take you to an unexpected place, and not just like you say, a 45-minute festival banger set gives me that doesn't sit well with me at all. And it's not very interesting for me. Anyone could come out and just play like banger after banger. However, we are at the point in the interview where we are going to be talking about tunes in more detail now, because this is the point in the interview where we talk about the House Culture Perfect playlist, and this is the
Yeah.
playlist that every single one of our guests has submitted 5 tracks to, based on these 5 different themes that we have. And you can find it on Spotify. It's obviously because this will be episode 69 going out soon,
Oh
in
wow,
July. So yeah, it's
nice.
and everyone's submitted to this. So it's a long, long list on the perfect playlist now. So we always start with a catalyst tune, a tune that opens your ears to electronic music. And you've given me 2 here, which is good because you've already mentioned one in a way.
Yeah,
Um, I know you've got them in front of you. So tell
yeah.
me which ones you chose and why you chose each one of those.
Yeah, I chose Jean-Michel Jarre Oxygen Part 4 because that track has been played in the radio and a lot. And I remember, like, I've been on a holiday with my mom, and we've been at the airport where there was in Malaga, I think, in Spain, and they were still playing music. Our flight was delayed for I don't know how many hours, and this track came back every once in a while. And I was rather young at the time, but I was always having like a feeling for music, and I felt that this track is something different from, because it's basically a musical track. There's
Hmm.
no vocals. A lot of the tracks back then have been, like disco funk tracks or stuff like that. And that was completely different. And I realized that in my early years, and yeah, I kind of think it sets the tone for a lot of the electronic music coming in the 80s. Yeah, it's the first for me, first track I realized has been produced with synthesizers.
Mm-hmm.
And then the
Yeah.
second track, as you said, I mentioned before, is Seven Ways to Jack, by Hercules and Marshall Jefferson on the
Mm.
vocals. It's been one of the track that has been on this compilation House Sound of Chicago, and the one that stood out the most for me at the time. Um, and yeah, it kind of started the whole house journey for me. So yeah, it has to be in there, of course.
Yeah, of course. A brilliant, brilliant choice. Okay, so a floor filler, something that, makes everyone report to the dance floor, something that maybe is a bit of a go-to sometimes. What have you chosen for that?
Yeah, for me, as I mentioned before, my DJ sets, I built them quite differently. So, like floor fillers are for me, it's more stuff when I'm laying the carpet. So I choose like a rather deep track that kind
Oh.
of has a good groove, and it's not basically the biggest track of my set. It's
Mhm.
just a track that I think is ideal to start with, or play as a second, third, fourth track to get people into it, like into what's gonna come afterwards. So I choose
Yeah.
Diplomatic in my mind, and it's a Dilby remix. It's been released on Sublease Music, a
Hmm.
second label I'm running besides Poker Flat. And yeah, this is my type of floor filling, because I think that's probably, I think has to be said, that when you build this carpet in 95% of the times, when you get to the point where like you have the people into the groove, then you
Hmm.
can go everywhere and you're not going to lose them. You don't need any floor fillers anymore because you can play whatever you want to play. And so that's why I didn't choose like the typical type of floor filler.
No, I mean, and like I appreciate that as well. It's fantastic to approach it from that way because talking about, like you say, that not necessarily science of DJing, but that feeling in terms of, I know this track is going to be like, okay, this is just going to take things up a notch or get people grooving in a different way. It's a
Yeah,
really interesting way to look at a floor filler. Okay, a sunset track, perfect track to soundtrack to
yeah,
sunset. What have you
yeah.
chosen?
As I said in the writing, this, like, I know there are many great sunset tracks, and a few years ago, 2 or 3 years, I don't remember, I worked on the track with a acid line, and then I came up with a piano and like some really nice chords, and for me, like, when the chords came in, I was like, okay, this is a complete sunset track. And then I sent the track out to Alilov, whose vocals I loved for many years. He's been doing so many great tracks with very different artists and very different approaches, and he sent some vocals for it. And he kind of also got I think the mind of that is being like a sundown or whatever, like a sunny kind of tracks, because the vocals are the haze, and it's more about, like the kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is my suggestion for the sundown track.
Perfect choice. Okay, a tearjerker. Again, this is another track on Poker Flat. It's called "Figment of My Mind" and by Dennis DeLay,
Yeah,
Dennis.
yeah, Dennis Delard. Yeah,
Yep.
it's like, yeah, this track. I have it since a few months. It took quite some time to release it because Hannes was taking some time on the remix, but also we were quite full with other releases, and so I've been playing it here and there, and every time I play it, I'm getting goosebumps, and and I'm like, it's for us, it's a bit of a stretch for the label. It's not 100% our sound, but I love this track so much. I met Dennis at the Mix Masters in Ibiza, even though he didn't really need any education because he's been producing music back in the days already, but he kind of stepped out of the music business for a while, and just recently kind of got back into producing music, and so he was more there for, like getting like reconnected with people, and enjoying a week outside of his home, just focusing on making music the whole week instead of having any other things around. And so I've been working with him on the track from the very early from the very early moments, and I felt the track from the very early beginning, and it's still like this track is one of my favorite track to play in my sets these days. I really love it, and I love the goosebumps.
Well, that's what all good music should bring, right? Yeah, the goosebumps. That's the signifier. The final tune, and it's great actually. When you sent this through, I was like, my God, I haven't heard that for years. And it's by a DJ that we have interviewed for this podcast, like way back in the very early days. Tell us what it is.
Yeah, it's Harry Romero featuring Robert Owens, and the track is "I Go Back." It's a
Mm-hmm.
track that when it came out, I played like so many times, and then I forget about it. Then I play it again sometimes, and then I forget about it again, and then just recently I rediscovered it by going through some of my older tracks. I kind of, like going through my record collection, and I was like, "Oh my God, this track! I have to, have to play it." And then I played till the end, which also is not happening all the time. But
Mm-hmm.
many times I choose more like disco-ish stuff because I want to have people leaving on a happy side, instead of playing like some dark shit or like really aggressive, like bangers or something like that. So, but I rediscovered this track, and as you probably realized with the track before with Dennis Delard with Jade Praise vocals, I
Mm-hmm.
I do like my vocals every now and then. Especially as the last track, and I love Robert Owens. I'm happy
Oh,
to have worked with him on
yeah.
on two tracks, I think. And yeah, this track is just it as it says, "I Go Back." It really takes me back to the very early days of, "Can You Feel It," Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Fingers and stuff like that. It kind of has the same vibe on a more modern level,
Yeah.
and it even nowadays, it's kind of it could have been released the other week,
Yeah.
and not like years ago. It still sounds very fresh, uh, still having the old school vibe, but sounding as fresh as it always was. It's such a great track, and it's funny not so many people know it anymore,
Mm.
but you still see, that's good positive reactions to it, and I think it's a last track.
Yeah, brilliant choice, brilliant choice. So happy you've chosen that one. Okay, well, this is the end of the interview. It's the final question that we always ask everyone on the podcast. Obviously, this is the House Culture podcast. We are House Culture. We're interested in all elements of the scene, not just the music. It's about the fashion, the art. The personalities. When someone says the term house culture to you, what does the whole culture of this scene mean to you?
Um, well, I probably, because I've been there from the very early stage, I probably say that a lot of is still like it's coming from black culture, it's coming from the gay culture, and also again, yeah, fashion did play a part, but not as much as it does today, maybe for some of the major figures in the scene. But this has also to do with social media and stuff. Um, but yeah, I think it's more of a. It always used to be a free space where everybody could be what they wanted to be, and no matter what you would wear or how you would look like, how sweaty you were, or stuff like that. That kind of got lost a bit with having phones in the club all the time. But luckily, a lot of clubs, even some nights at High this summer,
Mm,
decided not to have a no phone policy, which I think it's a great step.
yeah.
I mean, in a way, we kind of all need material, but I play a lot of clubs where it's not allowed to film or to take pictures, and compared to clubs where it's about where you can or people film all the time, it's that's I think it's the original vibe of house culture, where it's all about people, sweaty people dancing with each other, facing each other, not just the DJ, and just having a great time, dancing to tunes that is coming out of the speakers, and just enjoying themselves, letting go of all the stress that they had from the week, and not minding how they look, and just having a great time, and not judging anyone for whatever they want to do or want to be.
Perfect. That's a great summation of it all. That's the end. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.